Hi, Dr. Avinash here. Now, if you have completed my previous videos, all of them related to the adrenergic system, then trust me, anti-adrenergic drugs are going to be a cakewalk. Okay. Drugs for glaucoma will be dealt with in a separate video sometimes later. As it is, drugs for glaucoma is not in the syllabus for CCMP. Any which ways, let's talk about the anti-adrenergic drugs then. The idea is very simple. There are two receptors for adrenaline, alpha and beta. Then we can make drugs that are either going to block the alpha receptor or block the beta receptor or block both the receptors. Receptor blocking drugs that do not allow the original ligand, like here adrenaline is the original ligand. So drugs which does not allow the original ligand to exert any effect is called as an antagonist. So the action will become zero. So these are antagonists. Simple. Of course, there are two receptors, so there will be two kinds of blockers, the alpha blockers and the beta blockers. So alpha adrenergic blockers are going to act more on alpha receptors without affecting beta receptors that much. The general effects are very easy to understand, right? We have already seen this in our live session. Blockade of vasoconstriction alpha 1 and alpha 2 receptors will produce peripheral resistance to decrease. So there will be a reduced peripheral resistance, pooling of blood will happen, postural hypotension and fall in BP. These things you have already seen, right? Actually, now imagine this, you take a syringe filled with adrenaline and you give it to someone. What action do you expect from adrenaline? A rise in blood pressure, right? But if you give alpha blocker and then you give injection of adrenaline, then what will happen? Only fall in BP because of beta 2 action, right? This concept was first demonstrated by a scientist called as H.H. Dale, Sir H.H. Dale, and hence this phenomena is called as the vasomotor reversal of Dale or the Dale's phenomena. Okay, so anything that blocks alpha will only produce beta actions. Beta action is vasodilatation. We have seen how reflex tachycardia can happen, nasal stuffiness and meiosis can happen. Meiosis is constricted pupil. How the intestinal motility can increase, can cause loose motions. How hypotension can decrease GFR and leads to more complete sodium reabsorption. So sodium and water retention happens. How the tone of the bladder trigone, sphincters and prostrate is reduced, and how urine flow is possible in patients with benign prostatic hyperplasia. How contractions of vas deferens and seminal vesicles which result in ejaculation, they will be inhibited and they will cause impotence. Easy. Now note, alpha blockers will have zero effect on cardiac stimulation, bronchodilation, vasodilatation and other metabolic changes because these are beta receptors mediated, right? Now the drug that you have to do properly is a drug called as prazosin. It's the selective alpha 1 blocker, 1000 times more active on alpha 1 receptor as compared to alpha 2. Now there are subtypes of alpha receptors, alpha 1 receptors, you don't have to worry about it. It blocks the vasoconstriction and causes only fall in BP because beta, right? So beta is free, na? So when adrenaline will come in the body, alpha receptors are blocked, so only beta receptors will work. Only mild tachycardia happens. Prazosin will dilate arterioles as compared to veins, and that's the reason why postural hypotension is less, but can cause a first dose effect. First dose effect means first time you give the medicine you will get this particular side effect. So how do you minimize this? Take it at bedtime. If the patient is already lying in the bed, will he even realize he is getting hypotension? No, he is already sleeping. Slowly and gradually hypotension, the side effects like hemodynamic things and all, like fall in BP, they go away. This is called as tolerance. Other alpha blocking effects such as meiosis, nasal stuffiness, inhibition of ejaculation, these are also milder side effects. Now, I hope you understand that anyone having meiosis would be smaller pupils, will not be able to see properly. It's a side effect. Nasal stuffiness is a side effect, right? So, these side effects go away, or they are not there that much. So it's a better drug, right? And for these reasons, prazosin is right now one of the more important drugs. Initially, it was a drug called as phenoxybenzamine, but we don't use it anymore. Simple. How does it work? Not important. Okay, we know it is a alpha blocker. Apart from that, in addition to that, it inhibits something called as phosphodiesterase. This is an enzyme. When you inhibit this enzyme, it increases the smooth muscle cyclic AMP. More details about cyclic AMP in a separate video when we talk about smooth muscles. Okay, and this increase in smooth muscle cyclic AMP contributes to the vasodilator action. So not only it causes dilatation by alpha action, alpha blocking, it also has a direct action. Very effective orally. It's bound to plasma proteins. Now this we'll understand more when we do general pharmacology, but as of now remember that some drugs bind to our plasma proteins and some do not. Okay, so this binds to our plasma protein and it has a T half of 2 to 3 hours. So each dose effect will last somewhere between 6 to 8 hours. Simple. Prazosin is an antihypertensive. Also, it can be used in Raynaud's disease, benign hypertrophy of prostate. It can be done. Also, it by acting on the bladder trigone and the prostatic muscle, it improves the urine flow. So, in benign prostatic hyperplasia, you know now what happens. Their prostate becomes so hypertrophied that they can't empty their bladder. Prazosin reduces the amount of urine remaining behind because it is allowing the bladder to contract properly. And by reducing the residual urine volume in the bladder, prazosin decreases the risk of getting urinary tract infections and other complications. Now you need to know prazosin, terazosin, you just need to know superficially. It's almost similar to prazosin. It has a better bioavailability and a longer T half, so a single dose will lower BP over 24 hours. Also, it can be used for BPH. Okay, not only does it work by this alpha action, it also causes apoptosis of cells of prostate, and by killing the cells of prostate, the prostate will become smaller, so urine output will become better, right? This action of apoptosis has got nothing to do with alpha receptor blocker, but it of course helps in BPH. You don't have to do doxazosin or alfluzosin. Even tamsulosin is an optional drug, but I would like to talk about tamsulosin. This is uroselective. Uroselective, it works better on the bladder and the urogenital system. So it is as effective as terazosin in BPH because this alpha 1A subtype is more on the bladder base and prostate, so it blocks it. But it does not work like this, apoptosis. Apoptosis is a feature of terazosin, so that does not happen. So no apoptosis, yet works pretty good on the bladder. It does not change BP or heart rate, so it cannot be used as an antihypertensive, and there is no chance of or no increase in risk of cardiovascular problems even after prolonged use. The side effects like postural hypotension, dizziness, retrograde ejaculation, very few people actually get it. Okay, very rarely people have noticed a floppy iris. The iris becomes floppy, like not stiff. Okay, During cataract surgery they have observed this, but it does not really have too much of a problem. Plasma T half is 6 to 9 hours, but we have modified release capsules that can be given only once a day, and it works for 24 hours. It's way better tolerated alpha blocker in BPH who continue to suffer postural hypotension if they have been given terazosin or toxazocin. In such cases, tamsulosin would be a good idea. Silodosin is again something that you do not wish to do. It's like fine. It was developed in Japan, but not really the favorite drug to be asked in your exams. So where can you use alpha blockers? Wherever there is adrenaline excess or excess action of adrenaline or adrenaline, we want to block the actions, there they can be given. For example, pheochromocytoma. What is a pheochromocytoma? It's the tumor of the adrenal medullary cells. Now, because the adrenal gland secretes catecholamines, adrenaline and noradrenaline are called as catecholamines. These excess catecholamines cause intermittent or persistent hypertension. Okay. Now the patient comes to the clinic with high blood pressure. If you check the urine of the patient, the catecholamine metabolites is high, which means the patient has too much of catecholamines. These catecholamines are getting destroyed by the liver and the excretory products are increasing. Apart from that, there are many other pharmacological tests beyond the scope of pharmacology. When you talk about medicine, we will talk about this test in medicine. Phentolamine test was done once upon a time. It's not a very reliable test. It's having both false positive and false negative results, and as a result not really done, but it was done, so you need to know a little bit about it. We give injection of phentolamine 5 mg IV over 1 minute in a recumbent subject. If the BP falls, how much? If the systolic BP falls more than 35 mmHg and the diastolic BP falls more than 25 mmHg, it indicates pheochromocytoma. Simple. How do you treat this condition? Well, the treatment is surgical removal of the tumor. Okay, so that can be done. But sometimes the cases are inoperable or malignant. In such cases, phenoxybenzamine can be given as a definitive treatment. If phenoxybenzamine is not liked by the patient, prazosin is an alternative medicine that can be done. Okay, actually, when you want to remove the tumor, you give phenoxybenzamine for 1 to 2 weeks pre-operatively and give it during surgery also. The idea is, due to excess catecholamines, the blood volume is low. Remember, catecholamines shift the fluid from vascular to extravascular compartment, edema. When you give alpha blocker, the blood volume becomes normalized. Okay. Secondly, when you are doing surgery, you are going to touch the tumor. The touching of the tumor may cause more catecholamines to come out in the blood, causing a rise in blood pressure. If you have already given phenoxybenzamine before and in the surgery, then the chance of high blood pressure occurring is very, very low. Okay. Now imagine the surgeon somehow forgot to prescribe, or he prescribed and the patient did not take. Then phentolamine or sodium nitroprusside can be used as a drip during the operation. They both will cause fall in blood pressure. So rise in blood pressure because of handling the tumor, and fall in blood pressure because of sodium nitroprusside balances each other, and you get normal blood pressure. And removal of tumor is often followed by a fall in blood pressure because the blood vessels are dilated and the blood volume is low. But if by using this logic you have already restored the blood volume, then the chances of this fall in blood pressure happening would be very, very low. That's the reason why even for treatment of surgical removal of pheochromocytoma, these drugs are important. The second use would be in hypertension. Alpha blockers, other than those for alpha 1, okay, they can't be used for hypertension. Okay, because you know what happens when you give a non-alpha 1 selective alpha blocker? Alpha 1 and alpha 2 both receptors are stimulated, and The vasodilatation by alpha 1 is compensated by cardiac stimulation. Plus postural hypotension, impotence, nasal blockage are other important side effects that are produced by non-selective alpha 1 blockers. They are highly unacceptable. Okay. So phentolamine, phenoxybenzamine are of great value that can be given in controlling episodes of rise of BP during clonidine withdrawal or cheese reaction. We'll talk about cheese reaction in another chapter. There they are very, very useful. Of course, by now you have already understood that these are drugs that can be used for BPH or benign hypertrophy of prostate, right? So the idea of BPH is very simple. Prostate gland enlarges, because of which the urethra which passes through the prostate gland gets squeezed. This leads to urinary obstruction. Now, one concept says that the gland undergoes hypertrophy. Because of hypertrophy of the gland, there is compression of the urethra, because of which the urine does not come out. This is known as the static component. Okay. The other component, which many doctors believe is true, is prostate gland has some smooth muscles also. So they believe that benign hypertrophy of prostate is because of increased number of prostate smooth muscles, the hypertrophy of smooth muscles, and that leads to increased tone of the bladder neck or of the smooth muscles, and that is squeezing the urethra. This is known as the dynamic component. Now I hope you realize that there are two completely different things. One, urinary obstruction because of static component has a glandular part. Size of prostate has increased. The dynamic component is more smooth muscle related. Getting it? So, two categories of drugs can be used. The alpha 1 adrenergic blockers, they will take care of the dynamic component. They will decrease the tone of these smooth muscles, the bladder neck. And then to take care of the static component, there is an enzyme inhibitor called as 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. Includes drugs such as finasteride. They stop the growth or reduce the size of the prostate gland. Simple. Now the idea is very simple. Alpha 1 adrenaline receptors in the bladder, they increase the tone of smooth muscle. When you block them, they will relax. Right now, opposite action will happen, and the dynamic component, the dynamic obstruction decreases, because of which urine output will become better, urine flow will become better, and complete evacuation, complete emptying of the bladder will take place. So many of these benign prostatic hyperplasia patients come to the clinic with voiding symptoms like hesitancy and narrowing of stream or dribbling of urine or increased residual urine. They are easily relieved, but they also have some irritative symptoms like urgency, frequency, nocturia. They might not go away. So these symptoms are not really taken care of by alpha 1 blockers. Alpha 1 blockers are faster in their action. Within 2 weeks you will get good reaction to the drug, and the symptomatic relief is also better as compared to finasteride. Finasteride takes like nearly 6 months for clinical improvement to take place. Now remember, alpha 1 blockers are not really changing the size of the prostate, but they are more commonly used. But you also understand that till the time you are blocking the receptor, the smooth muscles will remain relaxed. The moment the patient stops taking the medicine, the effect will disappear. Even after taking continuous therapy, after a few years, the disease will continue to progress. So many doctors recommend, why not combine both finasteride and alpha blockers like prazosin, terazosin, doxazosin, alfuzosin, tamsulosin. They are preferred alpha 1 blockers because one's daily dosing. Okay. Some people believe that terazosin and doxazosin actually cause apoptosis. So that there is some evidence with that. So these would be preferred one. Tamsulosin has fewer vascular side effects because it's more specific. So these are the main 3 uses. 4th and 5th use, nobody uses them now for these reasons, so you can skip them. This is what you need to know from alpha blockers. Beta blockers, on the other hand, are drugs that inhibit beta receptors. Simple. Where will they work? Either on beta 1 or beta 2 receptor. Propranolol works on beta 1 and beta 2 receptors and blocks them. It also works on beta 3 receptors but has less activity. Okay. Plus, some drugs can work as inverse agonists. You know what is an inverse agonist? A drug that creates reverse action. Let me give you an example. Okay, you are in a car, you are driving the car, there is a signal in front of you, the signal is red, right? The red signal says stop, so the car stops. If the signal was green, the car would have just zoomed past. What I am trying to say is, when a natural substrate such as adrenaline, noradrenaline binds to the receptor, the signal is green, the action will happen. But a blocker, an antagonist, is a drug like the red signal. When a blocker attaches to the receptor, actions stop. The car does not go ahead, the actions do not happen. I hope I am making things clear. But imagine there is a new kind of a signal, let's say a purple signal. This purple signal, the moment you see purple signal, you know what the car does? Goes reverse. That purple signal will be called as inverse agonist. Agonist causes action like the natural substance does. Antagonist stops the action of the natural substance, whereas inverse agonist creates an exact opposite action like the natural substrate. So instead of increasing the heart rate or not increasing the heart rate, these drugs actually decrease the heart rate. I hope you're getting it. Okay. Some might work more on beta 1 receptors, some might work on beta 2 receptors. The one which are beta 1, they are called as cardioselective. The one which work on both are called as non-selective. We are yet to find drugs that are absolutely specific for beta 1, beta 2. So we have beta 1 selective and non-selective. This entire table is important. We also have a generation, first generation, second generation, third generation. Remember one of the classification, we are going to talk about propranolol and use that as our baseline drug, as a prototype. See, by now, if you remember that table we had done in the previous chapter, in my very first lecture I had explained to you that table, you would realize the actions are just opposite to whatever is the beta action. So propranolol will decrease the heart rate, the force of contraction, the cardiac output, everything will decrease. Okay, the conduction slows down. Now when the conduction slows down, it's not a very good idea. When the conduction was fast, the entire heart was contracting as one. But when the heart is slowed down, maybe the heart muscles will not contract as one unit. The effect on normal resting subject are mild, but those under sympathetic overactivity, like people who are already in high emotions or exercise state, their ventricular actions might become a little problematic. In normal human beings, normal subject, the ventricular dimensions, the size of the ventricle decreases, but in congestive heart failure, the size of the ventricle increases because the synergy is disturbed. Okay, the congestive heart failure will be precipitated or aggravated, so you be careful. Now because you are decreasing heart rate, the oxygen consumption, the cardiac work, both decrease. The pressure decreases, and as a result, the coronary blood flow also decreases. But that's okay. The overall effect in angina patient is improvement of oxygen supply versus demand. Supply is more, demand is less, exercise tolerance is increased. Now you will probably be thinking why I skipped this thing, because it's really not important at this point of time. When we do cardiovascular system, we'll talk about the epicardial and the subendocardial region in details. This is what you need to remember. Okay, directly jump onto blood vessels. Propranolol will block vasodilatation. Okay, so fall in BP by isoprenaline, that is also blocked. It enhances the rise in BP caused by adrenaline because now beta is blocked. So which is the only receptor available? Alpha. This is known as re-reversal of what? Vasomotor reversal after alpha block. Okay, I hope you remember the vasomotor reversal of Dale that we studied at the start of alpha blockers. Okay, see, propranolol does not have a direct effect on blood vessels, so there is no acute change in BP. But when you give prolonged medication, gradually the BP will fall. Surprisingly, in normotensive patients, the BP does not change. Okay, the total peripheral resistance actually increases because of beta mediated vasodilatation getting blocked. Cardiac output actually reduces, so BP hardly changes initially, but slowly and gradually when you continue the treatment, the resistance vessels gradually adapt. So total peripheral resistance decreases, and when there is no resistance, the blood pressure will gradually fall. So this is the best explanation we have. The other mechanisms are not important, but you can definitely have a look at it. I'll just read them so that things are easier. Okay. Reduced noradrenaline release from sympathetic terminals because beta receptors are blocked. Renin release from the kidney is decreased, so renin causes renin-angiotensin mechanism, so that is blocked, and central sympathetic outflow is also reduced, and by these three actions blood pressure probably is coming under control. On the respiratory tract, propranolol increases bronchial resistance. You remember beta 2 agonists are given as bronchodilators. When you block a dilator action, what will happen? Constriction. So that's exactly what is happening. See, in normal individuals, because the sympathetic tone is minimal, bronchodilator tone is minimal, this action will hardly be seen. But in asthmatics, this will become a huge thing. So in normal individuals it's fine, but in asthmatics you have to be very, very careful, otherwise propranolol will worsen the asthma and a severe attack may be precipitated. As far as CNS goes, there's no central effect as such, but a little subtle behavioral change, forgetfulness, increased dreaming and nightmares have been reported with long-term use of very high doses. In short term, anxiety gets suppressed because of propranolol. Okay, but this is more like a peripheral action because of propranolol. The tremors, see, when you are afraid and anxious, you start sweating, you have tremors. Propranolol decreases such things, right? When you are anxious, heart rate increases, propranolol stops all that thing. No? That's why by removing all these symptoms of anxiety, the person automatically starts feeling calm. He feels, oh, I used to be like trembling with fear, now I am not, so I must be confident. So this is like a peripheral action, not a central action of propranolol. Propranolol also can stabilize the membranes. The sodium channels are blocked, so it can be used as a local anesthetic, but it's not clinically usable. So even with eye drops, it's not a good anesthetic, because if you put it in eye gets irritated, cornea becomes anesthetized, so not really great. Propranolol blocks all adrenergic metabolic activity. So adrenaline induced lipolysis, the increase in plasma free fatty acid levels, all these things are gone because of propranolol. Because of this, the plasma triglyceride levels and the LDL to HDL cholesterol levels increases during propranolol therapy. Glycogenolysis is attenuated, weakened. Expected, right? It's a blocker, it's blocking the effect of adrenaline. So recovery from insulin hypoglycemia becomes delayed. See, this is important in diabetic patients. When you give beta blockers like propranolol, you need to be careful, because in case their sugar level falls, it is their sympathetic stimulation that activates, glycogenolysis, and blood sugar level goes up. Because of propranolol, this recovery will not happen. See, in us normal human beings not having diabetes, this might not really be a problem, but for somebody who has diabetes, this might become critical. Propranolol can stop the tremors. This is like a direct action, beta receptor blocking action. Okay, and the problem is it also reduces exercise capability, because the beta 2 mediated increase in blood flow to the muscles is also decreased. So crampiness may happen, and the glycogenolysis and lipolysis that we were discussing here, that is also going to stop. So all these things will cause less muscle activity. Given directly as eye drops, it reduces the secretion of aqueous humor, so the intraocular tension decreases. But as far as pupil size goes and accommodation of vision goes, there's no consistent action. Uterus relaxation in response to isopranaline and selective beta 2 agonist is blocked, which means the uterus will contract. See, normal uterine activity is not affected, but something that is being relaxed or contracted because of adrenaline will definitely get affected, right? As far as pharmacokinetics goes, we don't really have to do much. Okay, we can skip pharmacokinetics. Interactions I would recommend to do after you have done pharmacology, otherwise you will not understand why these interactions are important. Adverse effects and contraindications are very easy to remember once you have understood the actions. They can precipitate myocardial insufficiency, congestive heart failure, edema can happen because the sympathetic support to the heart is gone, na? That's why. So be careful when you are adding beta blockers. Bradycardia can happen. The resting heart rate can be reduced to 60 per minute or less. Propranolol will worsen the chronic obstructive lung disease like precipitate asthma. We already spoke about this, right? So it's very easier to understand now. It can exacerbate variant angina. Now, what is variant angina? Don't worry, we'll talk about that when we talk about myocardial infarction. Better avoided in diabetics because of the problems with sugar levels, and plasma lipid profile will get altered. So be careful in people who are having heart problems and bad lipid profiles. Simple. Withdrawal of propranolol after chronic use should be gradual. Why is that? Because the body kind of gets adjusted to propranolol, and if suddenly stopped, there will be rebound hypertension, worsening of angina, and even sudden death. Okay, this phenomena is called as upregulation of receptors. Whenever you block a particular receptor, the body tries to make more of those receptors, hoping to get some reception, right? So something like that is happening here. Propranolol also should not be given to patients who have partial or complete heart block, otherwise cardiac arrest will happen. Patient might complain of tiredness and reduced exercise capacity because the beta 2 receptors are getting blocked, right? So the glycogenolysis, lipolysis, all those things, the blood flowing to the muscles, they are all attenuated, they are all decreased. So be careful. And in cold winters especially, the patient might feel more cold hands and feet. This is because of the blockade of vasodilator beta 2 receptor. So people who have peripheral vascular diseases, their disease gets worsened. Apart from that, side effects not really due to beta blockers include GI upset, lack of drive, like not willing to do anything, nightmares, forgetfulness. It was also seen that incidence of mental depression is higher in patients who are taking beta blockers, especially the lipid soluble ones. And male patients usually complain of sexual distress. Now these actually cannot be explained fully by the beta blocking actions. but then yes, they are there. Okay. Um, Luckily for us, there are no other drugs that we have to do in details, but they will of course expect you to know what is cardio selectivity in beta blockers, like in metoprolol, atenolol, acebutolol, bisoprolol, or in nebivolol. These drugs are more potent in blocking the cardiac beta 1 receptors as compared to the bronchial beta 2 receptors. Now, this is more like a relative blocking. Okay, at low doses, these drugs will act more on beta 1 receptors and less on beta 2 receptors, but at higher doses, it will act on both. So what will happen here is, because of giving these medications, they will act more on the heart, so chances of bronchoconstriction will be low. So we can take, really speaking, we should not be using them, but theoretically yes, we can use them in asthmatics and COPDs, but generally they should be avoided in asthmatics and COPD. Okay, but then if you don't have any other option and there's a cardiac patient, then of course you will have to give it in limited dose under supervision. It does not interfere with carbohydrate metabolism, so no glycogenolysis is inhibited. So hypoglycemia and all, if it happens, it's taken care of. It's very safe in diabetics. Okay. Low incidence of cold hands and feet, so Reynolds phenomena like peripheral vascular disease does not happen. It has very little effect on blood lipid profile. It's ineffective in suppressing essential tremors, tremors that occur because of beta 2 action, and it is less liable to impair exercise capability. So this is one additional property beta 1 blockers will have. We also have partial agonistic beta blockers. These are pindolol, celiprolol, and acebutolol. These drugs can themselves activate beta 1 or beta 2 receptors, but not fully, submaximally. Okay, so they are partial agonists. Whether they are good or bad, that's kind of controversial. Bradycardia and depression of contractility happens at rest, which usually happens at rest with other beta blockers. They are not prominent, but exercise tachycardia is blocked. So people who are prone to severe bradycardia, they can be given these drugs. Withdrawal is less likely to cause hypertension or angina, which is a good thing. But plasma, again, like these are kind of debatable things. Plasma lipid profile is not really worsened that much. Not effective in migraine prophylaxis because they dilate the cerebral blood vessels, and migraine happens because of dilated blood vessels of the brain. And they are not suitable for prophylaxis of myocardial infarction. Many of the drugs like propranolol, prenolol, and acebutolol also have an anti-arrhythmic action because they stabilize the membrane. But they are really not that important. Like, this property hardly gives any benefit as far as medicines are concerned. Some of these drugs have low lipid solubility, like atenolol, celiprolol, bisoprolol, sotalol. They cannot enter into the brain, so they are less likely to produce sleep disturbance, nightmares, or depression. And they are, but again, like because they are lipid insoluble, they are incompletely absorbed orally, but they do not undergo first pass metabolism. Okay, they are as a result longer acting and tend to be effective in narrow doses. The lipid soluble agents are primarily metabolized in liver, have a shorter T half. Here they have given you salient features of all the beta blockers. I recommend doing metoprolol, have a look at it, and atenolol. These are important ones. You may, if you have time, do esmolol, but then not really compulsory. So let me help you out with these three important ones, and the other ones you will just go through and let me know if there's any doubt. Metoprolol is cardioselective. 50 times more higher dose is needed to block vasodilatation by beta 2 response. Now, there is a little bit of inverse agonistic action on beta 1 receptor. This drug is less likely to worsen asthma, but not really safe. It can be given in diabetic who have insulin or oral hypoglycemic agents, and people who complain of cold hand and feet when they are on propranolol, you can shift to metoprolol. This is important. Okay. Side effects are mild, and it is generally given orally for hypertension, angina, and CHF, congestive heart failure. But IV injection can be given for MI, myocardial infarction, unless bradycardia is there. Bradycardia is there, don't give it. Atenolol is a relatively selective beta-1 blocker with low lipid solubility. So it's incompletely absorbed, has first pass metabolism, which is very insignificant. So most of it reaches into the blood. If you don't know what first pass metabolism is, don't worry, we'll discuss that in general pharmacology. Because of longer action, once daily dose is more than sufficient. Because it's less lipid soluble, CNS actions are not there, no effect on lipid profile, and effective dose is in a narrow range. This is one of the commonly used beta blocker for hypertension and angina, but not for congestive heart failure. And lastly, esmolol, ultra short acting beta-1 blocker. It does not have any agonistic membrane stabilizing action, nothing like that. Its T half is only 10 minutes, which means within 15 to 20 minutes the action will stop. This is because it is inactivated by esterases in the plasma. Okay, so the good news is, because this is such a short acting, we can actually titrate, control the rate of beta. How much do we want the beta block to be there? Also, because esmolol has rapid onset and short lasting fall in BP that attends IV infusion of esmolol, it's very good to control, so if imagine somebody has a supraventricular tachycardia, you want to give a drug that works, and once the tachycardia goes away, stop the drug immediately. Or atrial flutter or fibrillation or arrhythmia, or maybe the person is undergoing cardiac surgery and you want to suddenly reduce the heart rate and BP, but after the surgery gets over, you want to instantly increase the heart rate and BP, then these short acting drugs are fantastic. Even in aortic dissection, where the aorta gets split because of high blood pressure, and in early cases of myocardial infarction, you can give this in the dose of 50 mg per kg, followed by a 0.05 to 0.2 mg per kg per minute infusion. These are the drugs that you need to compulsorily remember. So where do you use beta blockers? Simple. In hypertension, they are mild antihypertensives. All agents are equally effective. Okay, so once upon a time they were one of the first choice drugs, but nowadays there are many more better drugs available. Angina pectoris, all beta blockers reduce the oxygen demand by the heart, and hence they benefit angina, especially angina of effort. So somebody's exercising and chest pain happens, and this is very good. Taken on a regular schedule, they decrease the frequency of attack and increase exercise tolerance, but don't give too much, otherwise you know what happens. It will actually make things worse. Even they are not good for variant or vasospastic angina. We'll talk about that somewhere else, as I have already mentioned. These drugs are very good in cardiac arrhythmias. They suppress extrasystoles and tachycardias, any type, supraventricular, above the ventricles, ventricular, those coming from the ventricles, especially those mediated adrenergically because of adrenaline. They will definitely be stopped by these drugs. Propranolol IV is good for this particular purpose. Okay, otherwise esmolol is there, right? Even in myocardial infarction, they are good. Now there are two purposes in which we can use propranolol and metoprolol, the two drugs that we love in MI. Secondary prophylaxis of myocardial infarction. What does it mean? Heart attack has already happened. You don't want complications to happen, so you give propranolol or metoprolol. They prevent reinfarction and they prevent sudden ventricular fibrillation, because all patients of MI are at a higher risk of getting ventricular fibrillation. Okay, we put these patients on beta blockers for at least 2 years. Other beta blockers are not really suitable. The second way by which we use, second purpose, is myocardial salvage during evolution of MI. So in the first case, MI had already happened, myocardial infarction had happened, and now you're trying to prevent complications. Imagine a condition where the myocardial infarction has happened now. Okay, now, and the heart is still dying. Then what will you do? Administer these drugs IV within 4 to 6 hours of an attack, and then continue oral therapy. They limit the size of infarct by reducing oxygen consumption and prevent arrhythmias. Both these methods help a lot in saving patients of MI. Okay, now remember, you can only give it to those patients who are not in shock or cardiac failure and whose heart rate is more than 50 per minute, along with not higher than first degree heart block. Otherwise, beta blockers can be dangerous. Beta blockers are also given in congestive heart failure. Well, acutely worsen heart failure. These drugs acutely worsen heart failure. But if given for a long period of time, they have beneficial hemodynamic effect, especially metoprolol, bisoprolol, lebevolol, and carvedilol. These are these are given over long term in selected patients with dilated cardiomyopathy. They actually help. So what we do is, we don't suddenly introduce these drugs. We introduce them gradually and maintain for a long period of time. These drugs will then retard the progression of congestive heart failure and prolong the life of the patient. Okay, maybe the sympathetic overactivity in these patients is antagonized by these medicines. Overactivation of beta 1 receptor is actually toxic to the heart, because if you stimulate the heart too much and the heart is already weak, then it will cause myocardial apoptosis, and it will become unfavorably remodeled. The shape of the heart will change. Okay, when you give beta blockers, this apoptosis and remodeling is stopped. Okay, so apart from the beta blockers that I've already mentioned, other medicines also have to be taken, other measures also have to be taken. They are now standard therapy for mild to moderate CHF, congestive heart failure. Okay, but if somebody has too much of edema, too much fluid retention, then not to be given. Dissecting aortic aneurysm. Aorta is splitting open because of high blood pressure. The heart is pushing blood at very high pressure. Beta blockers reduce the contractile force of the heart and the aortic pulsations. So it's good. Pheochromocytoma, beta blockers can be given to control tachycardia and arrhythmias, but you should always give them with or after alpha blockers, otherwise rise in BP will happen. Okay, in thyrotoxicosis, we have noticed that symptomatic relief is achieved by giving propranolol, like the palpitation, nervousness, tremors, the fixed stare, myopathy, sweating. All these things can be taken care of by propranolol. It does not change the thyroid status. You need to take care of thyroid status separately. Surprisingly, propranolol inhibits peripheral conversion of T4 to T3. T4 you can consider as inactive form of thyroid hormone, and T3 as the active form. So what thyroid gland releases is T4, lot of T4 and little T3. Propranolol does not allow T4 to become T3 in the peripheral tissue. So as a result, it controls hyperthyroidism in that way also, but not post-operatively. This is pre-operatively. You wait for the radioactive iodine or antithyroid drugs. We'll talk about these drugs in a chapter for thyroid later on. So when you are waiting for the other drugs to work, propranolol will be good idea. Migraine, propranolol is most effective drug for chronic prophylaxis of migraine. Anxiety we have already discussed. I'm not wasting time repeating the same thing again. Essential tremors we have already discussed. Not Parkinsonian tremors. Essential tremors which does not have any other cause. Glaucoma, they can be given there. Beta blockers can be given in chronic simple glaucoma, but as an adjunct in angle closure glaucoma. And in hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy, hypertrophic, the muscles have become big. Obstructive, the muscles have become so big that the outlet of the heart is blocked. So this is the disease of the muscles of the heart, cardiomyopathy, which causes hypertrophy and obstruction, especially in the subaortic region. So the blood flow is not going to happen properly. Okay, this is because sympathetic stimulation forces the contraction of this region, and when this region contracts because of sympathetic nervous system, outflow becomes even more obstructed. Beta blockers improve cardiac output in these patients during exercise by reducing the obstruction, but that is only during exercise, not really during rest. Let's finish off this particular topic with labetalol. Okay, an important drug that can be asked in your exam, plus you need to know this. This is the first adrenergic antagonist which can block both alpha and beta. Okay, the commercial preparation that we have has equal parts of different diastereomers. These are it's kind of let's call them isomer, diastereoisomer, you can call it that way. So these can block beta 1, beta 2, alpha 1 and weak beta 2 actions. Okay, beta 2 agonistic, beta 1, beta 2, alpha 1 blocking. The beta blocking potency is 1/3 as compared to propranolol. Alpha 1 blocking is 1/10 of phentolamine. Labetalol blocks beta better than alpha. So when you give low dose, it's almost like propranolol. At high dose, it's like combination of propranolol and prazosin. Simple. Now if you only remember this line, you should be able to understand the next part very easily. A fall in BP, which is because of alpha 1 and beta 1 blockade, as well as beta 2 agonism, happens because of vasodilatation. Very high doses reduces cardiac output and total peripheral resistance without change in heart rate, or slightly decreased or sometimes increased. Limb blood flow increases in labetalol. This much you need to remember. It is effective orally, so you can give it in tablet form. It is moderately potent antihypertensive, useful in pheochromocytoma, clonidine withdrawal, pregnancy-induced hypertension and hypertensive emergencies, as well as essential hypertension. I hope you know essential hypertension means hypertension whose cause we do not know. Most important side effect is going to be postural hypotension, but only significant in some patient. Apart from that, failure of ejaculation and other side effects can occur sometimes, but the lipid levels are not really altered. Rashes, liver damage have been reported, but nothing significant as such. We will be discussing glaucoma in a completely different chapter, okay, in a completely different video. Actually, you don't have to actually do this for your CCMP. Go through this, let me know if there's any doubt so that I can solve it in the live sessions. Till the next time we meet, this is Dr. Avinash signing off for now. Take care, keep rocking, bye.